I don't really have any other questions. Adam came to the product meeting this morning and talked about user testing again, so I don't really have any other questions yet. I'll get signed up and whatever, we can figure out where it fits in and if we're going to use it. But we'll cross that bridge, I think, when we get there. For number 2, and I'm going to start with this. I'll quickly sort of share my screen, so that'll hopefully frame this a little bit better. This is the board for 13.8. It is for the most part locked in. So like I went through and we trimmed everything down with Andre and Michelle yesterday. So the issue list is much smaller than it was last week in terms of what will make the cut, given capacities and other things. And so one of the things that did is it reduced sort of what was happening in this last column. Outside of, there's some other things, but I think a lot of this is sort of well thought out. And so, and even these are actually just sort of slippage. They're not sort of net new work here, which means we've got more time to get ahead in 13.8 versus trying to trying to design and implement on the fly. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about, and which sort of plays into 4, but one of the things I've been sort of like immediately thinking about, and one of the things that we talked about was communicating status of where the merge request is and like how does that work. And so to that end, the feedback that we've sort of seen on reviewers so far is like, I don't understand how I use this field and the assignees field and which one like I'm supposed to do, and how do people even go find these, which is part of the drop-down problem that we know we're going to go address sort of immediately. But there's like varying forms of guidance out there of like leave people in the reviewers field forever, and then like, or remove them and then put them back if you need them to review, or remove them when the maintainer goes to review and they're no longer actually the reviewer. And I would say like all of that sort of comes back to like, it's not super clear how the field works, but it's also not clear like how you communicate like where the baton is or who's supposed to be doing something. And I know that there was a path for reviewers that was like the issues that are sort of maybe more thought out are like about approval rules and finding that right reviewer. I think what I haven't seen in feedback, and I'm assuming this is because Danger solves this for us and other companies probably have a way to solve this, is that people still know how to find a reviewer. Like we probably need to go back to that. But I think immediately where the concern is people don't know how to like tell the reviewer they need to do something, or the reviewer needs to tell the other person they need to do something. And so what I think 13.8, given that we have some extra time, would be, let's start to think about like, how do we show more status in that area? And I would say sort of the first actionable thing to come out of there would be like either showing that someone has approved it and they're sort of done, and then like the ability to request that review or like re-review. And Wildly Phil has an open MR for like requesting a re-review already. That has like a UI.
He has an MR for that?
Yeah, he sent it to me this morning because we were talking in Slack, and he's like, oh, I put this MR together that like prototypes it, and he pinged you on it like an hour ago maybe. It was like, hey, you should review this. So yeah, it was crazy. I was like, huh, well, that makes sense. So I'll drop it here.
It's amazing.
But I think like it would be good if we spent 13.8 without like the rush of trying to to figure out Phil's piece, right, of like getting that implemented necessarily, but like do the design, figure out what that looks like, what a re-review looks like, what a status communicating would look like, what is the next 4 or 5 things that we would need to do, and then we'll break those back down into the issues that we can go and sort of stage out over the course of them. Like, what does that end state look like? What are the things that we think we need? And then let's figure out how we get that into shippable components. Because I think that's going to be probably the immediate feedback we need and something we know we need to solve. And we've got sort of more time to do that. And I think in the longer term vein of, we've talked about communicating status, this is probably a good place to sort of start with some of that. And so that's my long-winded rant. I'd be curious on like your thoughts there and what you think in terms of, we've talked about, getting to what's next, but what you think about going down this path right now.
Yeah, I think the work with approvals was that angle, I think, was mostly fueled by first of all, trying to make the curative experience of approvals better. Like, it's something that we already have in, we didn't have reviewers at the time. We already had approvals. So let's try to make these two things work well together before we invest more in reviewers. And also at the same time, since multiple approval rules is, and for that matter, I think, any kind of required approval rule is on a paid tier. We also thought that making that experience better and tying it more closely with reviewers would increase or would be good reasons for people to upgrade their plan and start using more approval rules. So that's, I think, why we started to work more on that angle. And I think both are valid. I agree that, I mean, if we look at it the other way, approvals was there already. People have had more than opportunity to raise problems with approvers, and some of them have been raised. But to be honest, I was like, if we look at the issue tracker, and Catherine, you can also speak to that from user research, I was expecting people to be much more frustrated with the current approval rules experience than they are. There are, of course, bugs and requests for improvements and things like that, but it's not like this is broken or I don't know how to use this. Whereas compared to the angle that you were describing of how can we ensure that people know how to use the new reviewers feature, that could be more pressing. So yeah, I don't have a particularly strong opinion, although also because we're not heavy users of approval rules at GitLab, but I think reviewers, which also talks to the lack of polish or usefulness of approval rules. So that's interesting, because we could be the most powerful user of approval rules and we're not. But reviewers will likely be something that all users of MRs will use and will see. Even in core, they have reviewers feature, although it's only one reviewer at a time. So they're bound to use it, basically. So yeah, all of this to say that I think I agree with the angle that you're suggesting. And from the perspective of breaking this down, I think it would be, I started writing down what you were saying. That makes sense, like showing the status of the reviewer, like they've approved and now they're done or they're not done. How can I request a re-review from someone, but also how can I tell the author that they can now look back at the merge request? And also I was writing another thing, which is how do we then surface these re-requests? Because when you get a request for a review, or when you're assigned to something, you see that counter, you get an email, and you get a to-do. We could do the same of when you're re-requesting, you get an email and a to-do. But if you look at the merge request lists, it would be also be interesting to flag which merge requests need your attention, right? From all of the merge requests that I'm assigned to, maybe some of them are stale, or I'm just waiting for someone to review them, but maybe one of them has already had replies, and it'll be interesting to flag them. I'm just thinking out loud, not concerning myself too much in terms of what we're going to do for the first iteration, but I think it would be interesting in the epic just to lay down some of the questions and assumptions that we have to so we can have some constraints about the problem that we're trying, or the problem space in this case. Yeah, I'll stop there for your comments.
Yeah, I think that yeah, I in the epic I put like we should on the re-review, like it should be it to do an email. You bring up like a totally interesting point about like the counter, because I sort of hadn't thought about how that would work in this case anymore. And like the list, because now everything would sort of always be in the list, and that might not be helpful either. So I think those are like interesting interesting things we should consider and try and figure out how to address. I'll also just say that like I'm super happy you were on the approval rule side, you were thinking about paid tier usage. It was the same thought I had in when I was sort of playing this through, like approval rules in the reviewers list. I think the more we could get people to use approvers, even if it's like the always optional version that is like exist everywhere that's free, I think the easier it becomes to like sell you on paid approval rules, because
Exactly.
you're now like using them. And so I think like part of the thing that I was also thinking, if we focus on like this list and making it so like the only way that you could like confirm that you're done reviewing is by approving the MR, like that's how we get you to get that green checkbox next to your name or whatever. Like we're forcing you to use approvers to make the reviewers feature, to get the complete experience out of the reviewers feature. And then I think that logically helps feed into like, well, I wish my approval rules did more. And like, why did this person approve this? And so like people will want to start defining all of that. And I think by starting with like a purely optional way, like we don't like lock ourselves into anything yet. We sort of just get people to like do it all the time based on reviewers. And then we figure out how to like go back and build in all the other stuff so they can help think about that. Like I think like flipping the order of these actually will help drive that approvers usage that would drive paid approvals.
Yeah, and then I would say perhaps it would also drive frustration because of our current experience of approval rules. So that's the side effect.
We might find those things that we need to go and deal with on approval rules.
Yeah, maybe yes, maybe not. I'm not sure. And we're also still collecting usage data from approval rules. That's also something that I'm very, in hindsight, I'm very sad that we didn't instrument that early on, because it's a key. I mean, there are many things that we can instrument, but I think approval rules, we've poured so much time and effort, so money into approval rules, and we don't know exactly how people are using them, and how much, how little, how customized or not, and so we've been making decisions without that data. So yeah, let's also see and hope for that. I would assume that in the case of reviewers, we, at least what we've been releasing now, which is very minimal, it's automatically instrumented somehow, or do we need to account for that as well?
It should be instrumented as part of the new instrumentation work that's happening and starting in 13.8, because we're going to start rebuilding instrumentation for Redis counters to like do a better monthly active user count. So we should be able to get some amount of data around the number of users. I think what'll be challenging and what we won't have good instrumentation for is how people use it in the context of like adding and removing people. We won't be able to understand flow based on data, which is, we don't have good tools for that in data anyways to do that, right? Like we wouldn't be able to know that like, or let me think about it. It would be probably very challenging to instrument in a way that we could say like, you assigned someone as a reviewer, they got unassigned as a reviewer, they got reassigned as a reviewer. Like we would sort of just know that an action took place. We wouldn't know the context of those actions, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's something that we realize during this this discovery work, that it's something we need to instrument or not. But give me just a second, sorry. Sorry. Okay. Yeah. Do we need to create dashboards for that, or have you already done some work on that?
None of it's instrumented
It's,
yet. So as it
yeah.
starts to get instrumented, I'll start pulling up dashboards and getting it done. Because this will change our MAU metric. So like currently we use
Right.
an older counter that does like create, update, merge, and close or something for merge requests. And those are the only actions we count as users. So this will start tracking. The goal of like that epic was to track, the variety of actions you can take. But yeah, it might be good to, yeah, I think it's sort of wait and see where that data gets us and then what additional questions we have.
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah, for this, I think we can proceed with, it's great that you created the epic, and I'm thinking that perhaps also that we can properly compartmentalize the discussions if we can create an issue just with more of the divergence work, so we can see what competitors are doing, what questions do we have, what assumptions we have that might be riskier than others. So basically see where our level of confidence is on all of these things, so that we can then decide, okay, we need to, like, this is a no-brainer, let's do this, or we need to research that, or yeah, whatever it is. But I think it's good that we can have that discussion in another place and not in the epic, so that we can refer back to it more easily, instead of the epic, which will probably go with many other things.
Yeah, that's fine. I think I'm open to sort of whatever we want to do. I just wanted to get some thoughts down and out that we could start to build on for sort of figuring out what that looks like. So if we want to like segment that into individual issues for like specific problems or whatever, that's fine. Or if we just want to have one longer issue that we chat in, I think that'd be fine too.
Okay. Yeah. In in this regard, I'll also ping you there. But Catherine, if you have any insights or things that you've noticed over time that are related to this topic that you could link to in terms of research, that would also be helpful. But as I said, I'll ping you there so you're aware. Thanks. Kai, you have your next point.
Yeah, I just wanted to put it, it was like sort of an FYI, and then if you had any thoughts. Eric Brinkman looked at, and I'll go find the issue. He looked at GitHub's roadmap. These were he came up with sort of like a few things. These were the two that related to us, which was AutoMerge and version PRs. And those are his comments, not mine, like next to those. But I was curious if you had any thoughts on either one of those. We have talked about versioned PRs. We talked about version merge requests a little bit a few weeks ago or whatever. And we haven't talked about AutoMerge before, but yeah, I'm just curious what your thoughts are on them.
Yeah, the AutoMerge, I think just the terminology that you use, AutoMerge, just that simplifies everything that we now have for MWPS and add to merge string when pipeline succeeds and all of those things. I think we go to great lengths to explain how things will be merged when actually people just want it to be automatically merged, right? And we keep telling them it's when the pipeline succeeds. It's when the pipeline succeeds. But in a way, they already know that from the first time they used it, so they don't need to have repeated that for them. And I think we're also we've been complicating that experience now with the merge strings, and I wonder if for an individual developer, if they are really that concerned about this project using merge strings, but that one is not using merge strings, and if it's something that we need to explicitly tell them every time, instead of just AutoMerge is the feature, and there are many ways that you can do AutoMerge in the same way that you have multiple merge methods, right? You have fast forward merge, you have the merge commit, you have so many different things. So this is, and in a way, this is also complicating the user experience of the merge request widget, because we have all of these different states and texts, and we need to show. But coming back to your point about making that more effortless from the UI or command line. From the command line, as you've seen, it's already available, and from the UI, I think it makes sense in the same way that you're when you're creating a merge request, you want to say, I want the source branch to be deleted, or I want this to be squashed on merge. Why can't you do all of that and just say, I also want this to be set to automatically merge once I create it, so I don't need to wait for everything to be computed to then click the button, or for the pipeline to be created in the first place. So I think it's precious seconds that are shaved from many merge requests, probably.
Cool.
Yeah, I think the version PRs, what I was going to say is that, yes, we've discussed this, and I feel that I'm a bit torn between pursuing something like this, the version PRs, where you say, okay, I've paused the review, I've resumed, and then the reviewers see everything that has happened since the pause and resume, or solving the catching up problem with the experience that we have today. Because I think versioning merge requests and setting specific milestones inside of the merge requests of things that happen, it could be significant departure in user experience from people that are just used of having a continuous timeline of merge request activity. So perhaps if we focus on making that timeline more digestible and easier to know what has happened since the last time you've checked it, could be a nice way for us to then progress to this more first-class way of marking points in the merge request timeline. What do you think?
No. I think they're closely related, right? I think like the catching up problem, I feel like versions is a way to solve catching up. I think they're both, I think the problem is catching up. Like, how do you understand what's going on every time, right? Like that, I think that is the problem. And one of the ways that you could solve that is by versioning MRs in a way that like, here's a conversation and a change set, and then here's the next set of conversation and changes that like are the diff between sort of those two things versus collectively sort of what's going on. I guess one of the like things that I like about the version concept is that it seems much easier to understand and articulate. One of the things that I don't like at all about our merge request is versions. I think they're like one of the like sort of most awful things we've done is we've called these things versions, and like I don't even know what they're used for, or like who's doing this between like weird comparisons. And like I think they exist, and they exist as a way to like help people self-serve and solve the ketchup problem. I really just want to like use tomatoes in like a ketchup bottle every time I say that. Just like not helpful, but I think they like exist to help people self-serve that. I don't think they do that. Like I just think they're confusing sort of in context, because they don't, it is like a subset of what you would consider a version, right? A version, and if you were to expand that scope out, is actually all of the comments that happened on diffs during the period that I asked you to review it, and all of these things. Like that is a version, whereas we've like created micro versions, which is each time you've pushed, we've now like, or each commit or whatever we've decided that is, we create this other weird like version on the code that is sort of a more complicated way to think about the thing. And I would say that like 4 or 5 commits prior to me asking you for a review is actually version 1, not each of those being a separate version because I pushed 5 commits 5 times or something, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and there are bugs related to that, so it doesn't. Yeah, see you, Catherine. It doesn't work exactly how you're saying it. Although that's the explanation that we give, and I give everyone, is that it's the push event, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's other
Right.
things. So it's, yeah, I don't know. So yeah, basically I agree with that. And yeah, our current versions feature, although it's very confusing, it is, I think, an embryonic path that we took to eventually solve this in a way that GitHub is phrasing it, but we never did anything about it. And I wonder if it wouldn't make sense, because I also have the assumption that not a lot of people use it, if it would make sense to see how often people use versions, and that could be possible through through Snowplow because of the URLs. I think it changes. So you might be able to get some data just to validate what I assume as well is that it's not that used. Yeah, we have a diff ID parameter. So we might be able to, yeah, I'll look into that, but yeah, it doesn't work very well.
I'd just say wildly. I think the errors we got on merge rest were actually all related to that version dropdown because people were using it. So it may be more widely used than we think. It may just be like in a confusing. I think
Okay.
it's just probably not clear unless you use it a lot, maybe.
Okay. Yeah, I think it sounds like it would be helpful to gather the existing research that we have about versions and catching up to see how closely users' mental model aligns with GitHub's approach. And if they describe, like you were saying in the beginning, like the versions concept, as GitHub describes it, is easier to understand and articulate. And I wonder if we talk to users or we see how they're articulating their code review process, we may be able to see that it maps to that concept or not, or if it's a more loose catching up and not so formal. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Also, an action item for me. Yeah, the fourth and fifth point. I mean, we can talk about this at a later time or async because already overtime, or tomorrow if you think that makes sense.
I can keep going if you want to keep going. I'll leave it up to you. I have time now. So
yeah, I'd like to, but I unfortunately I can't.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, let's see if we can grab more time later this week because I'll be off starting Friday for 2 weeks. So it'd be good to like.
Yeah,
It'd be
me
good to try and
too.
find time for today or tomorrow then.
Yeah, I have some time. I have some time. Yeah, see whenever it works for you and add something to my calendar because this is something
Okay.
I really wanted to discuss. If you
Yep.
think that any of those are worth discussing before the group call, you can add some time to my calendar, even if it's conflicting with something else. I'll try to move it around.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we'll have time before the group call because that's pretty early in my time zone tomorrow. So.
Okay. Okay,
But I'll
sounds
find
good.
some time
We'll
so we can
talk.
talk some more later this week. I'll look now and we'll put something together.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, and I'll probably also have time to look into. Yeah, I see that you probably also have to look into the comments that I left in that merge request of the vision. So by that time, we'll probably have a more informed conversation.
Ooh, I hadn't seen you leave comments in it yet. So sweet. I will take a look at those too.
That's okay. Cool.
Cool.
Have a great rest of your day. It was great
You too.
talking with you.
See ya.
Bye.